In 1995, 20,000 feet up a Peruvian volcano, archaeologists found a child frozen for 500 years, perfectly preserved, as if she'd only just fallen asleep. For decades, researchers believed she died peacefully, a sacred offering, honored by an empire. Then CT scans revealed what was hidden inside her skull. But this story doesn't start with the scans. It starts with the ritual that put her on that mountain. Long before archaeologists set foot on the slopes of Mount Ampato, the Inca Empire had woven its power into the highest peaks of the Andes. These summits, crowned with snow and shrouded in cloud, were more than just geographic extremes. They were sacred places, believed to be the dwelling places of the Apus, the mountain spirits. To the Inca, these mountains formed a living bridge between the earth and the heavens, and offerings made at their summits carried the hopes and fears of an entire civilization. The most solemn of these offerings was the Capacocha. This state-orchestrated ritual was reserved for moments of crisis or celebration, an emperor's death, a devastating drought, a new era for the empire. Children, chosen for their beauty and purity, were gathered from across the vast Inca lands. Chroniclers like Juan de Betanzos and Garcilaso de la Vega described how these children were selected from noble families, honored and prepared for months or even years. Their journey to the summit was marked by feasts, ceremonial dressings, and rites of purification. Each step reinforced the idea that this was not an act of cruelty, but a passage into a higher realm, a transformation into messengers to the gods. Early scholars, reading these accounts, saw Capacocha as a dignified, even compassionate tradition. The children were described as children of the sun, their deaths framed as voluntary tributes that united the empire under a single spiritual vision. Archaeologists who later uncovered high-altitude burials found bodies carefully laid out, dressed in the finest alpaca wool and surrounded by gold, silver, and miniature offerings, pottery, figurines, and food. The absence of visible trauma on many mummies seemed to confirm the chroniclers' accounts. These were not victims of violence, but chosen ones sent gently into the embrace of the mountain. This interpretation was further strengthened by the pattern of burial sites. Across the Andes, from Lulailaco to Sarasara, children were found in stone chambers on sacred peaks, facing east toward the rising sun. The grave goods were not only rich but symbolically loaded, woven mantles, feathered headdresses, and ritual vessels that echoed the iconography of the empire's temples. Everything about the context suggested an act of reverence, not brutality. Even modern Quechua communities, living in the shadow of these mountains, spoke of the sacrificed children as protectors, spirits who ensured the fertility of the land and the favor of the gods. For decades, this was the story that shaped both academic consensus and public imagination. The Capacocha was seen as a uniquely Inca expression of devotion, a ritual that balanced political power with spiritual awe. It was a narrative that allowed the Ice Maiden, when she was finally found, to be seen not as a casualty, but as a sacred envoy, chosen, honored, and, it seemed, allowed to die in peace. Juanita's resting place on Mount Ampato was more than a grave. It was a stage set with symbols of privilege and care. When researchers unwrapped her from the frozen ash, they found her body swaddled in layers of alpaca wool, each textile woven with a complexity reserved for the highest ranks of Inca society. The ponchos and mantles, some embroidered with gold thread, told a silent story of status. Around her neck hung necklaces of gold and silver beads, while beside her lay miniature offerings, ceramic vessels, coca leaves, and a sealed jar still bearing traces of maize beer. These were not the belongings of a forgotten child, but the curated tokens of a chosen messenger. Her physical condition spoke just as clearly. Osteological analysis revealed a girl on the cusp of adolescence, standing 1.57 meters tall, with no signs of chronic illness or malnutrition. Her teeth were free of decay, her bones showed no evidence of hardship, and her hair, still dark and lustrous, held chemical traces of a diet rich in maize and llama meat. Isotope analysis confirmed she had been nourished on foods drawn from the empire's heartland, the kind reserved for the elite. Even in death, her body was a record of care and abundance. The final meal found in her stomach, partially digested maize, quinoa, and fibers of llama meat, matched the ceremonial feasts described by chroniclers. It was a meal fit for a festival, prepared not just for sustenance, but as a rite of passage. The grave goods, too, were more than decoration. The geometric motifs in her clothing echoed the patterns of Inca temples, while the coca leaves and chicha signaled ritual preparation. Each detail reinforced the idea that Juanita was selected, honored, and prepared for a sacred role. For decades, these clues shaped the prevailing belief that Juanita's sacrifice was a gentle one. Her serene features, the absence of visible wounds, and the treasures arranged around her seemed to confirm the chronicler's vision. A child sent to the mountain as a revered envoy, embraced by the gods rather than claimed by violence. The evidence, at first glance, painted a portrait of peace, a portrait that would soon be challenged by the tools of modern science. CT scanning transformed the study of ancient mummies by making it possible to look inside a body sealed in ice for centuries without a single incision. When Juanita arrived at the lab, radiologists prepared her for a scan using a 64-slice multi-detector machine capable of capturing images in slices less than half a millimeter thick. This level of detail allowed scientists to reconstruct her organs, bones, and even the smallest blood vessels in 3 dimensions, preserving every clue for later analysis. Each scan produced hundreds of cross-sectional images, revealing not just the structure of her skull and spine, but subtle details invisible to the naked eye, tiny shifts in bone, soft tissue densities, and the layering of wrappings that had protected her through the centuries. Forensic protocols demanded a non-destructive approach. Conservators kept the body at a constant low temperature and humidity, following strict guidelines to prevent thawing or contamination. Every step was documented, from the first digital scan to the chemical swabs taken from her hair and skin. In parallel, specialists used gas chromatography mass spectrometry, or GCMS, to test for the presence of ritual substances. By analyzing just a few strands of hair, they could detect traces of coca alkaloids and ethanol, even after 500 years. These compounds, once part of ceremonial preparations, became forensic markers that hinted at the rituals performed before Juanita's death. Modern forensic anthropology brings its own standards for timing trauma. Experts look for signs of perimortem injury, damage that occurs at or near the time of death. CT scans can distinguish between fractures caused by ancient violence and those that happened long after burial. The sharpness of a break, the presence or absence of healing, and subtle patterns of bleeding all help pinpoint when, and sometimes how, a fatal injury was delivered. These scientific tools, once reserved for modern crime labs, have become essential for unraveling the truth behind the most sacred and secretive rituals of the ancient Andes. The first CT images appeared on the radiologist's monitor as a silent storm of grey and white. In those cross-sections, a single detail shattered centuries of gentle myth. The right side of Juanita's skull showed a sharply defined depression, an impact crater just over 3 centimeters across, pressing deep into the bone. The fracture's edges were clean, unweathered by time, and the bone fragments had been driven inward toward the brain. There was no sign of healing, no evidence that this wound could have happened after death or during the long years in the ice. Forensic standards left little room for doubt. This was a perimortem injury, delivered with force and intent. The 3-dimensional reconstruction revealed the full extent of the trauma. The depression cut through the parietal bone, displacing shards into the cranial vault. Forensic specialists compared the pattern to modern cases of blunt force trauma, a single, focused strike, likely from a wooden club or ceremonial stone. The blow would have caused rapid hemorrhage and unconsciousness, ending life within moments. No accidental fall or post-mortem damage could explain the geometry or the sharpness of the break. The evidence pointed to deliberate violence. Chemical analysis had already confirmed that Juanita had been sedated, her hair and tissues carrying the unmistakable traces of coca and alcohol. Now the CT scans told a darker story. Sedation was not the end, but the preparation for a final act. The peaceful narrative, so carefully constructed from grave goods and chroniclers' words, collapsed under the weight of this new evidence. Scholars who had once spoken of a gentle passage were forced to confront the reality of a controlled, violent death. In academic journals and conference halls, the debate turned. Juanita, once seen as a serene envoy to the gods, now stood as evidence of a ritual that ended not in sleep, but in a fatal blow. Centuries of silence concealed a brutal truth beneath sacred ritual. Today, science can unmask even the most revered legends, forcing us to question what else lies hidden in the stories we trust. Every scan, every test, still redraws the boundaries between myth and reality. What truths remain frozen, waiting to be found?